Welcome to the third and last wee presentation on my wee growing edibles activity that I've been working on over the last few months. As Lorna said, the first session was back, it was actually the 2nd of May, and we looked at sowing seeds and planting out young seedling plants, followed up on the 13th of June, looking at these young plants' development and their ongoing care. And we did a little bit of broad bean and sugar snap harvesting, which was starting then. And now 5 weeks on again, harvesting is well underway. So first up, the broad beans. They proved a great success with a continuous harvest, really up until maybe just over a week, 10 days ago. Personally, I like to pick them young and I cook and eat them whole. But these last ones that I harvested were a wee bit chunkier and the skins were a good bit tougher. So if you've never really grown broad beans before and you're not sure what to do, snapping the pods open is really easy. It's very satisfying. You just sort of like take the pod lengthways between your two thumbs and you can just snap them open. And the beans pop out really nicely. On older pods, though, the beans have all got a fine membrane, a tiny skin covering the actual green bean itself. And if the pods are a wee bit older, you can eat the membrane, there's nothing wrong with eating it, but it can be a wee bit tougher. So I try to remove this membrane before cooking the beans if I'm not eating them whole in the pod. And removing the membrane can prove to be a wee bit fiddly. So what I would suggest you do, picture one here, shows the entire beans that have been popped out of their pod, but complete with their membrane on. Put them into a pan of boiling water for not even a minute. Give them a good boil, then drain them in a colander, and then just take one bean at a time. And it's quite simple. Squeeze the bean between two fingers, and the wee green bean literally pops itself out of the membrane skin. And then just pop them back into boiling water for, oh gosh, no time at all, maximum a minute. Drain them, toss them in a wee bit of butter, and voila. Tasty, tasty vegetables for dinner. And they're such a glossy green colour that they're such an appealing colour that you want to eat them. So that was my broad beans. The cucumber plants. This cucumber has loved life with lots of healthy growth. So this particular, these ones that I were growing, this is were all female cucumber plants. So all the flowers that it makes should produce a cucumber that don't need to be pollinated. If you look closely at the flowers, you should spot a small cucumber developing behind the flower. And obviously keep this particular shoot because this is where you're going to get a cucumber growing. But if you do spot some flowers that don't have a wee cucumber growing at the base of the flower, remove this particular flower as it will be a male flower. And in this case of my all-female plant, I don't want any male flowers on it because if an insect were to attempt to pollinate the female flower from the male flower, having visited the male flower, it would actually make this particular cucumber that would grow very bitter to taste. We don't want the birds and the bees doing their business on this all-female plant. We want it just to do its stuff itself. However, if you do grow a non-all-female variety, and the male-female varieties tend to be outdoor cucumber plants, and these ones I'm growing are indoors, you need to keep both male and female flowers on the plant to ensure good pollination of the female flowers. So, the cucumber plants produce such wonderful big green leaves. They're a wee bit Jurassic looking, but they're really attractive and large. if you find that there's far too many leaves and far too much growth going on, you can start to nip out some of the side shoots. If you feel you've got plenty of flowers being produced at the time, and you can cut off some of the stems with the larger leaves on them to let as much daylight and sunlight in to help ripen the fruits as well. The third picture here shows me snipping off some of the lower leaves of the plant. These are starting to get a wee bit discoloured and looking a wee bit unhealthy, and they were actually trailing in the compost as well. And I don't like my leaves lying on damp compost because that can encourage some disease to come into the plant, and it's just healthier altogether getting rid of them. Now, at our last session, you might remember, we spoke about, I think one of the attendees asked about taking off fruits that were developing really lower down the stem. Now, I don't disagree with that, but I don't do it. And interestingly, I paid attention to how many fruits were growing at the bottom of the plant this time. And I'm amazed how many keep on reproducing down there. I snip off the cucumbers, and then within days, there's another wee stem growing and another wee fruit developing. So I've kept mine at the bottom. So number 4, picture number 4. Once the cucumber plant, the main stem had reached the top of the obelisk, if you remember, it was an obelisk I was planting into. I nipped out the leader to stop it from growing up the way and to encourage it to divert its energies into the fruit production down below, into making the cucumbers. Daily checking and watering, and because they're indoors, they're getting no rainfall. And of course, this summer we've had our fair share of rain here in Scotland, especially here on the West Coast. So they maybe didn't get watered every day, but they were definitely getting watered every second day. And the weekly feeding continued and continues as we speak. So picture number 1 on the left here. Literally, I'm harvesting 1 cucumber a day, and this wee one plant is being really productive for me. Now, over this weekend, between one thing and the other, gardening fell by the wayside, and I missed a few days snipping off cucumbers. And this is what I was faced with the other day, yesterday, when I went out to do this. Use a sharp knife. So picture number 2 shows a fair collection of cucumbers waiting to be snipped off or cut off. Always use a sharp knife so that you can cut cleanly through the stem. And this cucumber here in picture 3 that I'm showing has got a wee curve on it, and that's because it had started to grow through one of the bars of the trellis support, like the conical shape support, and it was kind of like bent back in itself. So I've got a wee smiley face cucumber. You can see my haul in the 4th picture, the one far to the right. This was my haul yesterday. 4 that should have been picked a good few days ago, including my smiley shaped one, and 2 much smaller, just perfect sized ones. So while the bigger ones are edible, and I have been eating them, I remove their skins though, as the skins toughen really, really quickly, whereas the 2 smaller ones, they're just nice and perfect. They're just nice and tender and juicy. So yeah, lots of flowers still being made on the cucumber plant. So lots more cucumbers to come. This is us middle of July. If I keep on looking after the plant, feeding it and watering it, I would hope to get cucumbers well into the end of August. So it's been a success. Moving on to my pumpkin. First image here on the left-hand side was the picture taken on the 10th of June. Nice healthy plant with some lovely big pumpkin flowers showing. And then I mentioned powdery mildew on the PowerPoint presentation that I did back in June, on the 13th of June, talking about being aware, because courgettes and cucumbers, plants like that, in fact, lots of plants, can be susceptible to powdery mildew. So lo and behold, round about the 20th of June, I noticed a wee bit of powdery mildew on my pumpkin plant. And just to remind you, powdery mildew is a white powdery fungal residue that can build up on pumpkin leaves and other plant leaves, especially if humidity is high due to poor air circulation. So always ensure there's enough space for individual plants to sprawl and spread out. And spores of the disease can lie dormant in old foliage, soil and compost and be scattered by water spray. And I'd suggested that everybody always tries to water directly onto the compost, avoiding spray onto leaves upwards as much as possible, and really avoiding spraying over the canopy of leaves itself. And if you do find the disease, excuse me, if you do find the disease appear, cut off and dispose of the disease stems and leaves and get them into a bin and do not add them to your compost heap. And it can also occur where the plant is subjected to irregular watering. So where did I go wrong? The plant is inside my polytunnel, where I've grown pumpkins for several years now, and the doors have been wide open all summer. And I reckon my air circulation is fairly good because I've got sides that I can open on the polytunnel as well. So it would appear that it's came down to my watering. Now, I don't know, I've been thinking about it. Previously, I've grown my pumpkins directly into the raised beds in my polytunnel, but because this time I wanted to grow the pumpkin plant up a frame to have it sprawling upwards to make a wee bit of a feature out of it, which hasn't happened, I planted it into a large round pot. Now, if you remember back to the first session, the pot was fairly shallow. It was probably only about 12 to 15 centimetres deep. And I'm fearing that despite the regular watering that I have been giving the pumpkin, the depth of the compost available wasn't sufficient enough to hold on to a sufficient amount of water to support the pumpkin's active growth. So it has been drying out, and that has more than likely led to the powdery mildew. So putting the powdery mildew to the side, well, I didn't actually, I cut it all off, cut off the damaged, the diseased leaves, and they got disposed of properly. But I also started to notice that lots of the flowers that were developing, lots of male and female flowers, we talked about the difference the last time as well. And I noticed I was getting lots of female flowers, lots of male flowers. But the female flowers were constantly just wilting and rotting off. And that's what they do if they've not been pollinated. And of course, the weather does come into play here because we've had such wet, windy conditions. Bee activity is much less. They really can't fly about in wet, windy conditions. Insect activity has been really poor. I've got a big water collecting drum thing that sits outside the polytunnel. And sadly, I find that I've always got lots of dead insects in it. And this year I've noticed I've had hardly any insects floating on the top of the water, and the insect activity within the polytunnel has been noticeably poor. So I think the poor germination, pollination, I should say, of the female flowers is due to the poor weather and the lack of insect activity. So there's not a lot I can do about that other than just hope for the best and see what came of it. So the plant, I took off all the lower leaves that were diseased, and the plant still continued to clamber up the frame. And picture 2 here in the middle shows me having tied a little bit of string to help it on its way. But you know, it's fascinating to watch these plants that climb, the little tendrils that wrap themselves around the wires. They're as strong as wire, they're as strong as really tough nylon. It's incredible how they work. And as much as I've tied one bit of string there to sort of like get it on its way, it's managed to, what little clambering it has done, it's attached itself beautifully. So despite me moaning, saying that there's very little bee activity, two fruits were pollinated and two fruits did set. And you can see my two pumpkins starting to grow down the bottom here. Interestingly, they're at the very bottom of the plant, and none of the flowers that have developed growing up the frame have set. So I'm very pleased with these. I was very pleased with these two pumpkins forming beautifully. But powdery mildew was still posing a problem despite using clean secateurs, always cleaning my secateurs in between cuts and disposing of all the damaged leaves. The powdery mildew just would not leave this plant alone. So here we are. This is my plant yesterday. Very, very sad looking compared to what it looked like when on the 10th of June. And then this close up here, closer to the top, you can see it still has the will to fight. This is new flowers developing at the top. These ones are all male flowers. I've got no female flowers in here, but I'm ever hopeful that I will get some female flowers and our good summer will arrive and we might get a pumpkin developing up the top. So two pumpkins were developing. And this is my photograph taken yesterday. You can see the one at the front is a lovely green, dark green, kind of mottly yellow spotty colour. And the one at the back is now turning yellow and it is rotting. So it is. So I'm losing one of my pumpkins. But I'm not one to be beaten. I did still have 3 young pumpkin plants, ones that I'd actually sown in the activity, the session that I did, the first session that I did, and they were still in their little pots in their nursery conditions because I didn't have anywhere for them to go. But I went and I cleared out a raised bed outdoors that wasn't really doing anything productive for me. So I planted them up, I should say, in this raised bed last week. And the middle picture, the last picture, the third picture shows the 3 plants, 3 new pumpkin plants growing in the raised bed outside. So air circulation shouldn't be a problem. And the picture in the middle is a wee bit closer up of a lovely big flower that was on the plant yesterday. Sadly, it was a male flower, but because it's a young plant, it's only going to produce male flowers to begin with anyway. But there's lots of other growth coming on. So fingers crossed, we're going to get pumpkins outside, hoping that our Scottish summer is still going to arrive and these plants will have a fighting chance of maturing before Halloween. So that's my pumpkin story. Sugar snap peas were a huge success. They flowered until the end of June, and with fresh pods being produced, allowing me to snack on them directly from the plant. I just love eating these sugar snaps straight off the plant. I don't do anything with them, I just eat them. That's all there is to it. You can open up the pods, as I've done here in picture 3. You can snap the pods open and remove the peas and eat them raw, straight out the pod, or you can boil them like you would do if you were boiling up regular frozen peas. But I prefer to pick them still quite young and tender, and I boil them whole, pea in pod, for a few minutes and enjoy them crunchy. The plant has only this week been retired to the compost heap, but it proved a really successful and worthwhile plant to grow, and one that will definitely be getting grown again next year. So runner beans. The first image on the left here is the runner beans on the 10th of June. And here we are yesterday. This photograph was taken on the 18th of July, almost 6 weeks later. 6 weeks of relentless watering due to me having kept the plant indoors, as the wind, where we sit, we're quite exposed, west facing, which is lovely, which is fabulous. But the wind that we've been having, the wind was shredding the leaves mercilessly. And I was very vainly wanting to keep them nice looking for taking photographs for you good people. So this meant there was no rainfall, assisting with watering. And being inside the polytunnel, that meant that on any dry, brighter days, the compost dried out even more, as did the leaves. Therefore, more watering was required. So lots of watering, topped up with a weekly feed. And the last image, the one here on the right-hand side, is of the beans starting to develop towards the end of June. So like my broad beans, I like to harvest the beans when they're younger, when they're maybe about 10 centimeters, 10 to 12 centimeters long, as I find that they're much more tender, the skin is smoother, and I like to eat them cooked whole, bean in pod, the entire thing. If you do leave them on, they just get fatter and longer, which is fine. And you can start to see the beans bulge inside their pods. So picture number 3 shows me quite literally popping a bean pod off of the stem. Hold the bean quite close to where it joins the stem, and just give it a good tug, or even just a wee snap with your fingers, and it comes off really easily. You don't have to use scissors or a knife or anything like that. And of course, well, you would see from the first picture, there's a jungle of leaves there now. So once you start raking through that jungle of leaves, you spot more and more pods hiding in there, ready to be picked. It's actually a really fun and rewarding activity, one that young people in particular would enjoy getting into. It's like a big surprise. So you might ask, why have the beans done so well compared to my pumpkins, especially when I've been apportioning a little bit of blame to the weather and the lack of insect activity? You might remember that pumpkin flowers only have a tiny window of opportunity to be pollinated. The flower only opens the one time, and that is early in the morning, and it closes by midday. Therefore, if there's no insect activity because of the poor weather during these few hours of that short window of opportunity, that flower's one chance, that one hope of pollination has passed, never to be repeated. Whereas runner bean flowers, on the other hand, are available for pollination over many days and at any time of the day, increasing their chances of pollination hugely. So back to picking the beans and eating the beans. If I pick the beans that are fairly sure, I'll boil them up whole and eat as they are, or I'll slice them into 2 to 3 centimeter size pieces and boil them with sliced carrots, or add them into a stir fry. I really like them in a stir fry, actually. And if I have missed the chance to pick them when they're still young and they're older with tougher skins and stringy sides, I'll use a potato peeler to remove the side strings, then slice them long ways and slice them again into slithers, and they really cook beautifully that way. Remember to add a wee dot of butter when serving them after simply boiling them for only a few minutes. Delicious. And lastly, oh, runner beans, sorry. There's loads of flowers on the plant. There's loads of more harvesting to be done. They will continue, providing I keep watering them and feeding them and harvesting them, because it's really important to keep on picking them as well. The flowers that are still being made will continue to grow into pods, and I will be enjoying them well into, gosh, possibly even into September. And lastly is my nasturtium tree. You'll remember it was just some big one branch that had fallen off a tree that I'd kind of wedged into a pot and put some compost in and around it. And I sowed some nasturtium. Did I plant them? as can't remember if I put seeds in or grew them as seedlings. Anyway, young plants went in, and this is my nasturtium tree yesterday. Now it's never been watered, it's never been fed, and despite it being a climbing variety of nasturtium, it doesn't appear to be very keen on heights. But it is definitely producing plenty of flowers that I've been adding to salads for their peppery kick and colour. So I'm really pleased with my nasturtium tree, although it's a wee stunted nasturtium tree. And that brings me to the end of my roundup of climbing edibles.